Well, there's nothing wrong with autumn. It's just
I'd like to welcome everyone to the library's event tonight. My name is Michael Gordon. I'm the president of the board of the Ballard Kinwood Library. And the event is called What Your Body Can Say to Marketers Now and in the Future. Professor Joe Turo will be addressing us. Just two technical notes, and then I'll turn it over to Janet, who's the head of our events committee. The first is that this meeting is being recorded. You probably saw that as you joined the Zoom meeting. And the second is we'll do this in a Q&A format. There is a chat option in Zoom. This has been limited so that the hosts can see what's in the chat. So if you have a question, if you type it in there at the end of the presentation, I will be reviewing those and putting up some of the questions there to our speaker so we can address them. And with that, I will let Janet give the introduction.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. We are thrilled today to have as our first lecturer of this season, Dr. Joseph Turo. He's the Robert Louis Shayon Professor of Communications at the Annenberg School of Communications at the University of Pennsylvania. He has won a Distinguished Scholar Award from the National Communications Association. And I love in 2010, the New York Times called him the ranking wise man on some thorny new media and marketing topics. And in 2012, the Trustee Internet Privacy Management Organization designated him a privacy pioneer for his research and writing on marketing and digital privacy. He has authored more than the 11 books that are sitting here on the CV from the last time he spoke, probably 13 or 14 now, edited 5 and written more than 150 articles on mass media industries. The last time Dr. Turow spoke to us was, I believe, 2 years ago, and he spoke about his book on going shopping called The Aisles Have Eyes, which gave us all chills. And today he's going to speak to us about the emerging voice intelligence industry, as he wrote about in his book, The Voice Catchers. Thanks, Dr. Turow.
Thank you for that introduction, Janet. I hope you'll find it as interesting as she made me sound like, but we'll go ahead and do it. Now, everybody probably going to talk for about 45 minutes and then open it up for questions, 40 minutes or so. Almost everyone has probably gotten on an 800 number, and it'll say stuff like, this call may be recorded for training and quality control purposes. Lately, I've heard even them add for analytical purposes. And you may not have realized, and I didn't until I really started this research, that contact centers are major areas where voice profiling is taking place today. Essentially, what companies do is they link your vocal cords to your supposed emotional state. And then once they decide what you are sounding like, meaning are you angry, are you happy, are you logical even, they triage you to a person who's supposed to be the right person to speak to for that kind of individual. And there's a lot of software around this topic. Companies feel that it's important, first of all, to get people calm if they're angry. Secondly, it supposedly helps with upselling. That is, an agent who's good with certain kinds of emotional personalities is supposedly good at getting to spend more money and to be more satisfied. So this is just, and this has been going on for about 10 years now. And there's a fascinating history of this going back, believe it or not, to John Wanamaker and calls that he had. He had hundreds and hundreds of people in the John Wanamaker store, we're talking like 1920, taking phone calls. And the whole idea of a contact center really began with stores like Wanamaker and with companies like AT&T and their operators. And over time, they didn't want to have to spend so much money on people. Companies like IBM and others began to create software to allow for more interactivity with computers before the agents took over. And that in turn led to this idea of understanding, in quotes, people's voices. So it raises the issue of what does it mean to talk about voice and emotions, and what does voice do? Devices such as smart speakers and smartphones are now capturing both our words and the timbre of our voices. So it's not just what you say, it's how you say it literally through your vocal cords. So Amazon's chief Alexa scientist told a technology publication that, quote, when she recognizes you're frustrated with her, Alexa can now try to adjust, just like you or I do. You know, putting a dart into the idea that, in fact, Alexa is really listening to the sound of your voice as well as to what you say. It's very difficult to figure out what Amazon does with all this stuff. I can get into that later, but the privacy policy is almost opaque, and the same with Google. But it's very clear that both companies and others are interested in figuring out how we sound to make sense of who we are. Some companies may also draw conclusions about your weight, your height, your age, your ethnicity, and more, all characteristics that some scientists believe are revealed by the human voice. So, I mean, this is not just something that burst out of marketing. There's a whole history of trying to understand the meaning of the sound of your voice. This goes back again around 100 years. But in the 21st century, there's a lot of attempts by scientists to attach that to machine learning and other kinds of artificial intelligence. And they seriously do believe that the voice is a kind of portal into your body. I was talking to a woman named Rita Singh at Carnegie Mellon, who wrote a scientific book on voice, which she was nice enough to share with me as I was writing my book. It's mainly formulas, but I sort of read around the formulas. And she talks about the history of the idea of voice and the notion that, in fact, you really can learn, quote unquote, all this stuff. Now, it's Rita said that the idea of emotions, capturing and labeling a person's emotion, is probably the least predictive. And that's the area where marketers are focusing most of their attention, ironically enough. But if you just pigeonhole the idea for a bit, that it's all of this stuff that companies can figure out, or at least they believe they eventually will be able to figure out, this raises some really important issues. Now, all of this is related to a new industry that's emerging around contact centers and beyond contact centers that has the potential to change, I would argue, marketing and society in the US and elsewhere. And I call it the voice intelligence industry. Believe it or not, there was no name for it. I was seeing companies interconnected with other companies, but nobody really talking about it as an industry and nobody really naming it. So I named it the voice intelligence industry, intelligence as in spying, finding out about us. It means interrogating your voice to learn things that you may not want to say, or even that you may not know, supposedly, about yourself. True or not, many marketers see voice profiling as a part of their future. I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So a big question is, what's driving marketers' use of voice profiles? And here I go back again to John Wanamaker. It's interesting that this is a statue of Wanamaker looking at the location of his store, right? Or around the location of his store. He was one of the most important merchants of the late 19th into the 20th century. And of course, they call him citizen because he was not just a merchant, he was a postmaster general. And he had a lot of impact on the city of Philadelphia. The thing about Wanamaker that a lot of people in the advertising industry remember is something that people I call, some others call, John Wanamaker's dilemma. Okay, John Wanamaker had an epigram that, at least it's attributed to him, that he said, "I know that 50% of my advertising works, but I don't know which 50%." And he tried really hard to do what today people in the marketing industry would call attribution. For example, how do I know if I put this ad in the Philadelphia Inquirer that is actually going to sell the stuff? So he would, for example, put umbrellas one night really cheap and show it up in the Inquirer, and he would look at whether given the weather, obviously, whether umbrellas sold more, and he would attribute that to the ad. But it was always a big problem for advertisers, particularly advertisers not in the direct mail or direct marketing industry. How can you show whether your advertising works? Now, when the internet came around, we're talking the commercial internet, which was about 1993, 94, advertisers thought that now they could solve the problem, because now the internet allowed people to click. They could click to buy. And presumably, if you clicked on an ad after you saw it and you bought something, or you went to a website and you looked at something and then you bought something, that at least showed a relationship between the money you spent and what people were doing. The marketer's ideal goal for the internet became personalized messages and track responses, right? Figure out what you can send to a person, figure out how to do this. And if you're interested, we could talk about this. It had a lot to do with cookies and other kinds of trackers, and then track the responses, right? It turns out that it didn't work out as they hoped for a whole lot of reasons. And I'll just share a few with you, many of which you probably know. Ad blocking. Many people block ads. There are software programs that do that. Advertisers get crazy over this sort of thing. Ad blocking is not unique with the internet. In its own way, people block ads when they watch television, right? They go to the bathroom, they go to the kitchen, they go elsewhere. They turn the channel with their remote control if they're watching broadcast cable TV. I even remember there was a thing in Variety that I read years ago where a head of one of the networks was talking to reporters, and he was railing against people who don't pay attention to the ads. And he was saying it is a contract, he said, between people who watch television and advertisers. We give you free programming, you have to watch our ads. So one of the reporters raised his hand and he said, well, what about if you have to go to the bathroom? So the guy said, bathroom's okay, but nothing else. You really ought to sit there and watch the commercials. Well, there is a lot of ad blocking when it comes to the internet. There's sharing of computers, so that even though a company may have cookies on the browser that you use, if you share the browser, it may not know as much about the person as it would like, because you don't know who exactly is getting on. Companies try to figure that out, but it's not easy. There's click fraud, an enormous amount of click fraud. Click fraud is when companies fraudsters, will go ahead and make believe they are clicking on a website that they own in order to get the money that the ad that is clicked on will pay the website, okay? And some people figure that around 23% or so of all advertising on the web is click fraud, and there's attempts to get around it, but not perfect. And so there are other problems as well. And so this goal, this idea that the internet would solve John Wanamaker's dilemma has turned out not to be the case. It's not really clear. There are a lot of companies trying to make money on attribution, but it's really difficult. There's also something called the deprecation of the third-party cookie. The third-party cookie is a cookie that tracks you as you move across the web. And for reasons that we could get into that have to do with the politics of the EU, as well as increasing anger in the United States, Google has decided to not allow third-party cookies on its Chrome browser starting 2023. That has freaked out the advertising world, even though some browsers already don't allow third-party cookies. Apple, you may have noticed, is now requiring an opt-in for its mobile advertising ID. So if you go and download an app, the app will say, for example, we will track you and sell your data to XYZ. Do you want us to do this? Apple has forced them to do that. And they find that a lot of people say no. That's called opt-in. And so those two things are really also concerning companies that want to have advertising, and advertisers who feel they're not going to be able to track people as well as they would like. So we see marketers saying, gee, we can't, solve John Wanamaker's dilemma, and we have to find new ways. And this is what I call the unending spiral of personalization that we'll see happening in the internet world, which is when you find that you can't do one kind of personalization, you begin to look, because of the cookies and all the other things I talked about, you begin to look for another way to do it. And then over time, the argument is that doesn't end up being perfect, and you look for yet another way to do it. And it keeps ratcheting up as you keep collecting more and more information about individuals and trying to target them. And so here we have using voice biometrics for what people in the industry told me is added value. They're not going to get rid of demographics or psychographics or lifestyle or location marketing. But the idea is that by trying to interrogate your voice to try to find out about you, this gives a value added when it is done. And they feel that that is going to be part of the use of the voice moving forward. Now, Amazon and Google are the highest profile forces in voice surveillance today. You probably know about Amazon's Echo and Alexa. Google has the Assistant. They're not really yet using the maximum potential of these tools. As I said earlier, they collect the stuff, your voice print, which is the embodiment of your voice in a print like a fingerprint. And it's not clear how Amazon uses it. It seems, as I suggested by a quote earlier, that it does. I tried really hard to figure out the extent to which it works in marketing. As you probably know, if you have the Amazon Echo, you can tell it to distinguish among people in your household. So it will know me compared to somebody else in my household. It will also ask you when you sign up to tell you what room you're in, what room the particular device is in. And if you have more than one, and many people do, it will know how you sound in one place versus another. Same stuff with Google. Google goes out of its way to say that with its Nest devices, like its Assistant and also, for example, its thermostats and other things like that, it will not use the voice print. It may store what you say and use that for marketing purposes, but it won't use a voice print. It does, however, reserve the right to use the voice print when you're talking to your phone, for example, or talking to your car with Google or something like that. Amazon was really cagey. I mean, I interviewed one person from Amazon who was forthcoming about a lot of things, but when I got back to him, because I read in the New York Times and the Washington Post, it said Amazon says that it does not track people for by their voice for marketing purposes. But I couldn't find any of that stuff in any of the documents Amazon puts out. So I called this guy back and I said, can you tell me whether this is the case? Show me where it says this. And he says, I don't know, but I'll connect you with someone who knows. So he connected with me with a person in the PR area in Washington, the lobbyist. And she was very kind in the beginning and listened to me and says, I can help you, but you have to promise not to publish anything about it. And I said, what do you mean I'm writing a book? I can't make that promise. That's the whole point. She never got back to me. So this kind of concern is not just a concern that I found about Amazon among the public. A lot of marketers are scared stiff of Amazon and Alexa for reasons that I'll talk about in a bit. But Google and Amazon also have many patents that show a strong interest in the future of voice profiling. So for example, here's one from Amazon where it actually has this figure. So it's kind of interesting to talk about. Woman walks into her apartment and says, Alexa, I'm hungry. So Alexa, hearing the sniffle and the cough and assuming that she has a cold, says, would you like a recipe for chicken soup? And the woman says, no, thanks. Alexa says, okay, I can find you something else. By the way, would you like to order cough drops for 1 hour delivery? And the woman says, that would be awesome. Thanks for asking. And Alexa says, no problem. I'll email you with an order confirmation. Feel better. Okay. So Amazon right off the bat is saying we're foreseeing a time where people seamlessly talk with Alexa to the point that Alexa can intuit their internal problems and in fact suggest solutions that may even help Amazon sales, because Amazon, you may know, has a pharmacy with delivery. And we'll talk a bit more about this later, but that's one of Amazon's patents. Google has a patent for what is essentially a monitored home. The patent describes microphones all around the house, and it has the ability to detect individuals and by the sound of their voices, detect the age of the person. And then the parent, for example, will label the kids. And the microphones and the software will look at what people are doing in different rooms and allow the parent to adjust the various technologies that parent wants the kids, for example, to use or not use at different times of the day based upon that Google device's knowledge of where they are and how they sound. The weird thing about that patent is that it says that if the parents get divorced, the software can migrate to the other person's home. In other words, you can have it in two homes at the same time, but it's kind of strange that somebody actually wrote that into a patent. Spotify has a patent as of last January for listening to people so that it can evaluate. If you talk to Spotify and ask it for a certain song, it will evaluate your emotions, your age, and other things about you. And that caused a lot of controversy, to the point there was even a manifesto that a couple of organizations connected to a larger set of organizations around the world sent to Spotify saying, A, don't do this and don't sell the patent to anybody else. But the head of Spotify said, we're not doing it now, but he wouldn't promise that it wouldn't be done. So the stuff still lingers. You may have heard of Amazon's Halo wristband. It's kind of a proof of concept. They have a band like a Fitbit that you can put on. It's mainly for health stuff, and they push it that way. There's a new one that actually has a display on it. The original one doesn't have a display. And in both of them, you can find out, if you want, what your voice sounds like to other people. So it'll tell you that you sound angry to your boss, or friendly to your spouse, or rushed or nervous to your friends and things like that. It doesn't say where it got the data from. And it also says that it doesn't share the data with anybody, including Amazon. But it is a really interesting proof of concept, to some extent coming off of the patent I mentioned before. It's all based on the idea that people want to interact by voice, even if they know companies are listening. All of these companies are figuring that people feel comfortable, or can be made to feel comfortable, doing this stuff. This is the Amazon description of the Halo on the web. See how you sound to your colleagues, and they call it health. Health is more than physical. With the tone of voice analysis, Halo can help you communicate more thoughtfully and keep relationships strong. So the notion is they want to make Alexa and Google and the others, Siri, into devices that sound friendly, that sound like you don't have to worry about them, unlike people worry about, say, facial recognition. And they seem to be doing it. Hundreds of millions of people interact with assistants on their phones all the time, and this is increasing. Almost 1 in 4 Americans, last I read, which was a couple of weeks ago, owns a smart speaker in the home. Okay? So it's becoming a fact of life. I suspect that this notion of pecking at your phone, typically, rather than speaking to it, is going to be, next generation is going to go out the window, with voice software becoming, natural language processing becoming more and more adept. It will be, people will get used to speaking to everything. And they're being wooed at doing that. I call it seductive surveillance. It's a term I picked up from a dissertation that was written in the UK. And it's the idea that these technologies are made to be very seductive, not just in how they sound and what they can do, but also the price. You could get an Echo during Prime days for like $15. Okay? And they play down the surveillance of it, turning it into a kind of habituation. Now, and companies throughout the economy are encouraging it. I spoke to people in home construction firms that are building these things into walls. And what they do, I'm talking to companies like Toll Brothers and Lennar. And what they do is they interview people who might buy homes, and found that of the companies that create assistants, including Google, people really do want Amazon or, including Apple, people really do want Amazon or Google. And so they're actually building these things into the walls of the home with sort of pads, tablets that you come in and has all the interactivity with these devices as you walk into the house and around the house. Hotels are using them. I don't know if you know that, but a lot of hotels now use these devices as a concierge, either an Amazon or a Google. And if you have a subscription with one of them, you can actually use it. It will know your the songs that you like. It will know other things about you. And when you leave, presumably it will go away. It will delete that stuff. But hotels find that it's much more efficient than people calling downstairs for things. You can even check out on them, for example. Schools, believe it or not, are using them. Teachers are using them for helping with repetitive skills in like kindergarten and first grade. Now, of course, Google and Amazon don't take the data about the kids, but they do take the data about the teachers, okay? And there's nothing that says they can't do that. So there's a whole lot of controversy in schools, even in some of the upper levels, of whether it's appropriate to essentially indoctrinate, as some teachers would say, these kids into these voice technologies. But some schools are using them. There are shopper marketing firms that are trying them out. Shopper marketing is a pretty big industry that uses places like supermarkets and department stores and other places like that, big box stores, to array products and get people interested in products. And one company, a company called Mars, based out of Minneapolis, did a very interesting thing with a whiskey store, a liquor store in Manhattan. What they did is they encouraged people to come into the store with a sign from the outside, and they arrayed about 150 bottles of whiskey on a rack, which had lights under each bottle. And then in front of all this was an Amazon Echo, which they encouraged people to ask the Echo to help them find the best whiskey for them. And the Echo ran them through a branching system. And after the fact, the Echo would tell them, based upon everything they said, like what kind of flavor do you like? Whom are you getting it for? Things like that. They told them what whiskey they thought, 5 whiskeys they thought would be good. And it actually increased sales, supposedly. Now, what's interesting at this point, there is no way, because of the nature of the technology, Amazon could not figure out who the individual is who's talking, partly because of the processing difficulties. But down the line, that may be the case. If you allow Amazon to track you across a whole variety of places, it might well know who you are and give that particular store some heads up as to what you might want to buy and what your price point is. Advertisers are planning for it. They're really interested in the whole issue of reaching people through Alexa and Google Assistant. There are apps, if you know, inside them that you can essentially use to encourage people, but also it raises some really interesting problems for advertisers. And what concerns them is what they call a voice-first world with limited shelf space in Amazon and Google controlled environments. So for example, let's say I say, Amazon, Alexa, get me some batteries. okay, you probably know what would happen. The first answer is probably going to be, unless you have bought specific, unless you bought, I thought Alexa was talking from the I think it has. Alexa just went up in my other room because I said, Alexa, Alexa, stop. Can't believe this. Alexa, stop. Can't hear it. Can't, she can't, it keeps going. At any rate, so you have a situation where they're worried, advertisers are worried that if they say, if Amazon controls the space, they may get pushed out, okay? Let me just shut Amazon Alexa off. I'll be right back. Alexa, stop. Well, that's a great example of chaos because of that. I'm not even going to say that word again. At any rate, you have this situation where advertisers are really in a tense environment with Amazon and Google trying to figure out what to do about this. How is it that they can get their products in front of people if there are only one or two or maybe three products that get named? And so ad agencies are doing lots of research on how to become part of the answers. Okay, they're also doing research on, right now they have the apps. So for example, a battery company may have an app that people can go to within one or the other smart speaker, but they get the transcripts, they don't get the voice print. And they know that Amazon and Google get the voice print. So they feel these companies have a leg up over them. Companies, as a result, are seeing a future with their own assistants. So if you have Bank of America, for example, you know that Bank of America has an assistant called Erica. And when I started my research, I looked at the Bank of America website, and it said nothing about voice. And I thought, gee, they have this Erica. I can't imagine the lawyers haven't gotten in on it. By the time I finished the book, I looked again because I was writing about it, and they had stuck in a few words there about how they have the right to use your voice. Okay, they don't say for what, but it is in line with voice profiling. Now, if many companies get involved with these assistants, and there are these freelance voice activation and voice profiling companies out there, Google and Amazon may use that to justify jumpstarting their own voice profiling activities. They don't have to be the first to do the whole schmear, but in fact, they might end up doing it. And a lot of people may feel that that's just the way of the world. If you're interested, we could talk of this whole idea of resignation, which I have found in some of our national surveys is almost 60% of Americans are simply resigned to this sort of thing. So the larger question is, why should we care, right? That's the burning question. Get it? Burning question. Businesses using this voice technology to offer better pricing sounds great, unless you're in the camp that loses the discount or some other aspect of thing. What if you end up being refused insurance or having to pay much more for it because you sound different from the way they think a person like that should sound? What if you find yourself turned away during early job screenings, or have your cultural taste prejudged as you surf the internet? It may well be that voice is a new way to do algorithmic bias, essentially, where it's not your race or your ethnicity that seemingly is behind why they are prejudiced to you. It's your voice. But of course, in the end, it may well, in fact, be reflective of one or another type of prejudice. There's also stuff about, and we can talk more about this, of course, there's also the potential for voice scraping by malefactors. I don't know if you guys know about Clubhouse or some of the other ways that you can go into a place, a social medium, and talk, for example, in Clubhouse. And it's actually pretty interesting. It's like a meeting where people can discuss certain things and everybody has their name. So there's a head of the meeting and people in the talk, and it's an interesting discussion group. But I can imagine somebody going in there and scraping voices, just like a company has been known to scrape people's faces. and then do voice profiling on that and sell the results to companies. So, or some other malefactors. So that's an issue that hasn't really even been discussed. And of course, we could talk about deep fake voices in connection with this. Some more, voice profiling is at the forefront of a gamut of biometric technologies that marketers and other institutions and societies like political campaigns or governments, the police, the military, will use for surveillance and control. Think about the idea of a political campaign calling you based on a profile it has of your emotions that were done through voice technology, or on the fly, where it can hear you and the software can change its persuasive message based on what it hears, okay, from the person, if it asks you to say a few things. Think about the question, should a person's voice profile become part of the person's voter profile? There are some states that would seem to allow that to be public. Governments could use it for a variety of purposes, if they, particularly in authoritarian context, the police, the military, for surveillance and control. There's even talk that in China, for example, they're using it with the Uyghurs, just as they're using facial recognition. They're using voice profiling to decide who is a Uyghur and who isn't. All of this is about what can be called a hidden curriculum. The more people know about or get used to voice as a daily activity in marketing, the more they may feel comfortable with voice profiling in other aspects of society. The basic message being that voice profiling is part of the 21st century. Get used to it. Just like that campaign guy told me in 2012, when we found that 90% of Americans are against tailored political advertising. I was on a radio show with a political consultant who didn't disagree with our finding, but he said, people are going to have to get used to it. So it is a very troubling, I would argue, situation. Many states allow opt-out for voice profiling, meaning you don't even have to say, as long as it's in the privacy policy, it can work. Some have opt-in, like Illinois, California, I believe, Texas. But I would argue that both are a problem, because opt-in, the question is, does opt-in really tell you enough? If Alexa says, would you like to have us use your voice for all the relevant things we can give you, and you're already used to Alexa being a part of your home in so many different rooms, and you can ask it so many questions and it sounds so terrific. What does it mean? Do you really understand the implications of giving up your voice? Does Amazon really know what it's going to do with your voice in half a year or a year and a half? So I would argue that voice marketing, and in fact, biometric activities in marketing, should be a red line. You know, I used to believe that transparency was an answer, education. And over time, well, I've been looking at this stuff since the early 90s. And over time, I've come to the conclusion through our national survey research, we've done 6 or so national surveys, that Americans simply don't know a heck of a lot about what's going on. Why should they? They have a life to live. I don't know how many people here even knows what a third-party cookie is, for example. And when I say deprecation of the third-party cookie, what the heck does that mean? And so the whole issue of what does consent really mean? Is it possible to give consent? I would say when we get into the human body, trying to figure out to interrogate the human body, it should be a red line for marketing. There are some good things about biometric technologies. There are companies that believe they can use the voice to figure out whether you have a disease. Some companies, there's an Israeli company looking at Alzheimer's. It also tried to do stuff with COVID, see if voice could be used for to figure out if somebody has COVID. I don't know what they found with that. There are other authentication issues with voice. My voice is my password. You may be saying that to a variety of banks and finance companies. If it's done well, it's fine, but even that can be problematical. But when it comes to marketing profiling, the idea is, I think it should be, in fact, outlawed. That's an issue we can discuss if you want to. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Professor. I have a couple of questions or comments in the chat, which I'll read out now. If other folks either want to type into the chat, or I think the group is small enough that people could unmute themselves and just ask the question directly. So do you see those questions too?
Now I can see the chat. I see 2 questions.
Yep.
Please remember you can type questions in this chat. Do I see questions? Why don't you read them, Michael?
Sure, no trouble. First is, I think, more in the nature of a comment, but you can respond. Forgive me for being personal, but I was surprised that you have Alexa given your content here.
Yeah, okay, that's funny. No. Well, the reason we did it is because I had to write the book. I mean, if you can't write a book and even continue to do discussions about this stuff if you don't have the technologies. So we don't just have Alexa. I have Google in my room here, and it's true. But I have to say, these things are pretty stupid, at this point in time. If anybody has one of them, they almost invariably, they're great marketing, they're great capitalist instruments, as it were. They don't know. It's much easier to go on a search engine and find an answer for anything that's beyond simplistic. But I mean, it's an interesting question, but I couldn't do this work without having this stuff around.
Relatedly, is there any way to have it and sort of limit the scope of what it can do with your voice, or is it all or nothing if you have one of those?
Well, they'll always say that you can shut it off. The problem with that is that if you shut it off, it loses the spontaneity. And so, I don't know what the heck is going on here. It loses the spontaneity. And so you can't really, it's kind of useless. Most people keep it on. I don't think many people shut it off.
True. And one question goes back, I think this is more in the earlier part of the talk. Can you please explain click fraud? I didn't understand. Thanks.
Sure. Click fraud. Imagine that you're a crook, and I'll say crook in quotes because some people will see them as Robin Hoods. But let's say you want to take money from advertisers. What you do is you create a make-believe website, okay, with software, and you create make-believe clickers or real clickers. You may hire 100 people in a basement in Malaysia, and they go to this website and start clicking on ads that show up on the website. They're not real. Okay, and even in a more sophisticated fashion, you get a computer to click on the ads.
Whereas if you want,
and that's called click fraud because you're getting paid. The website has very little information on it, but it's getting paid for ads that are really for people, impressions, as it's called, that are kind of non-existent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. We have another one here. This is very practically minded. Is it better to sound angry or pleasant when you want to speak to a live person at a call center?
It depends on the context. I would say angry here. It'll get you farther from everybody I've spoken to.
Let's see. A general question. How do we keep ourselves safe and keep up with privacy with a nonstop, always evolving world?
That is the key question, of course. And I would say that it's increasingly difficult. I don't advocate being totally neurotic, but I think you have to decide what privacy means to you, and what you can handle. I actually read privacy policies, and there are sometimes I will not go on an app because of a privacy policy I read. We had, if I may say, we had a situation recently. I don't know how many people use an app, a scheduling app called, what's it called? I'll think of it in a second. But it's a scheduling app that the Annenberg School, somebody sent around to set up a faculty meeting. And I decided to read the privacy policy of it. And it was unbelievable. They were sharing your data with, and that may even be your time data. It was called Doodle. It is sharing your data with 50 to 100 different companies. And if you wanted to get away from that, to opt out, because it's not Europe. In Europe, it would be opt in. Here it's opt out. You literally, and I tried, had to check off no continually for these companies. And it was very difficult. It took a long time. So this is a very difficult activity. People think it's just Google and Facebook. And the more I look, the more I realize a lot of utilities, if it's free, it probably means they take your data. There was another one I came up with where I was looking for somebody's phone number, and this particular app, and because I read later they're being investigated by the Federal Trade Commission, they actually had opt-in. But talk about gall. They said when you wanted to use wanted to get the number from them, they said, by doing this, you will be part of our community, and we will be able to take all of your contact information and use it in any way we want. And most people don't realize, go to Target. If you have your Target app on and you're going around Target, they have the right to, aside from giving you discounts and stuff like that, the privacy policy says that they have the right to pay other companies to find out more information about you and use that information in their targeting of you. So this is endemic. It's, we hear a lot about Facebook and Google, but this has become part of our landscape. It's almost impossible to get around. Now, somebody might say, who cares? It's just an ad, right? It's just a discount. There are people who care about discounts of $2 and $3. I don't want to minimize that either, because it is, but it's also the question of what ads do you get to see? What kind of a society do we want to have where underneath the world that we see is a roiling world where ideas about you are being created and you have no idea, you don't know what is happening, and you have no control over it. That's the situation that we're in right now, with a few exceptions. Okay? And we're moving in other directions, hopefully, and the EU is trying to move in a different direction. Some people here want us to go in that direction, but it's a serious problem. And that's why we find that 58 to 63% of Americans in 2 surveys we did basically throw up their hands and say, I'd like to control the data that companies have about me, but I don't think I'll be able to. And so they just will accept discounts willy-nilly. They'll try their best to do what they can, but in general, they feel that they're resigned to giving up their data.
So with actually 2 questions that are sort of a pair, they make a nice pair, and they sort of illustrate both sides of that. One is, I guess, more on the resignation side. Has that ship already sailed with the loss of privacy on the internet, on cell phones, and kids going with Alexa and friends? That's sort of on that side. And then there's another question. Are the EU's standards a good model for the US, do you think, in protecting consumer privacy, data, et cetera?
Well, these are good questions. One of the reasons I wrote this book was because this particular ship hasn't yet sailed. I mean, the voice intelligence industry is really just emerging, okay? And it is it's an emerging industry that is not totally sure of itself. Amazon goes crazy to try to encourage people to use this new Amazon Halo by saying, we have privacy on your side, we're not going to take your voice right now, that kind of thing. It is I had a situation not too long ago, and you can get paranoid about this. I was writing an op-ed for the New York Times about this subject, and I was showing the staff editor a really interesting video on intelligent routing that a company called NICE was doing. And I showed it to him a couple of times because he had trouble getting it. And then a week later, I tried to get to the same video and it was off the web. It's quite possible that NICE saw where the place was being watched from, the video was being watched from, and said, we don't want to have this on anymore. And so I couldn't find anything about it. I could not find it.
May
So that is, it's a real interesting situation.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely. I think there are a few folks with questions. Why don't you go first? And then
Yeah,
if I
here's
do have
somebody
questions-
Thank
asking,
you. It
raising
should
hands.
be
I don't see
short.
people, see.
What about the use of identity for one's account? Voice recognition, say with Fidelity, to allow me into my account with them. Would you approve of that?
Yeah, I think that's fine if it's done legitimately by a legitimate company. There's a company called Nuance that does most of this. And I think Nuance does a good job. It's not perfect. And so it won't be the only way that you get allowed into your account. There have been attempts, I read something in a BBC reporter did, where his brother got into an account because they have a similar voice.
Oh,
So Nuance will not use only your voice, but it'll be voiced together with other stuff. And, you know, again, if it's a bank or TIA or something like that, they use it. I see no problem with that. The problem I have is profiling or using it in ways that might discriminate against people.
Mhm.
yeah. Thank you.
Do other folks have questions they'd like to ask directly? You can unmute yourself if you do. If not, I've got one or two more in the chat to pose.
My wife said there was some people raising their hands.
Yes, but they've put their
They've
hands
already
down
done
now.
that.
All right, so I will ask one or two more from the chat. One is about, if I change my TV channel with the remote keys, I get a message requesting me to use the voice function. What information does Comcast get if I use my voice instead of the remote to change the channels? And do
At
they
this
use
point, I have no idea. I mean, it's a really good question. I really don't know what Comcast is doing with your voice. I haven't looked at their privacy policy. I haven't heard anything about it. But that's the point where the ship hasn't sailed yet. And a lot of companies are still nervous about this stuff. So I don't know that Comcast is full out using people's voices. I haven't heard anything about it. It is interesting to think what they might do. A lot of people, for example, have been concerned with what internet service providers would do with all the information they have about what you're looking at, what you're watching, for example. And that in itself is an interesting problem because Comcast has enormous amounts of information about you. But I don't know what they're doing with voice.
And maybe for the final question, someone asked if you could address a little more the potential for discrimination from the data that's collected. You referred to it, but if you have any more.
Yeah,
thoughts.
sure. I mean, it is voice, like any other aspect of a person, can be used to decide whether you want that person or not as a customer. I mean, companies that won't say it as much as they used to say it, but there are targets and there are waste. And the idea is, can you, is this person someone that you want to waste your money on because they're not likely to buy your product? Okay. Or maybe you sell them a second tier product. You get Kay Jeweler ads, I get Tiffany. Okay. Now that, you know, what that means is it's on the one hand, it's discriminatory. And as I said, it could even go down to things like restaurant. You go to a fancy restaurant and you call them up and somehow they decide based on the sound of your voice and the way you talk that you get a bad table, or maybe you don't get in today, or other kinds of discriminatory activities toward people that are supposedly not racially or sexually oriented, but the voice becomes a kind of surrogate for that. We don't know what companies will do. The discrimination in advertising takes place all over the place. But beyond that, the discrimination, as I said, can go on to other areas. For example, immigration. The U.S. immigration bureaus now will listen to people's voices. They have the right to listen to your voice. And imagine if, for example, not just for authentication or identification, let's say you're asking, you're a refugee, and their software determines that you really aren't from the place you say you're from. Okay? And there's no other way to contest that. that raises some really interesting issues. How do we know the software is always right? What is the situation with that? Let's say you're in a court and the court says, not just does this person sound like he's telling the truth, not does this person say things that are truthful or not truthful, but how does that person sound in terms of his affect?
Yes, I'm trying to raise your hand.
Joe, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
This sounds like the vocal equivalent of redlining.
Yes, it
And
is.
redlining is against the law. Is there any attempt by Congress to look at this and to determine that some of this could potentially be illegal?
Well, it's not illegal right now, as long as you say it's okay. And as I say, in some states, Illinois has a really tough biometric privacy law. But even in Illinois, if you say it's okay, it's opt out, they can get away with it. I was giving a talk to people at the Federal Trade Commission a couple of weeks ago, trying to make the argument that it should be against the law. Okay. To my mind, this is deception. There is no way to really give consent. And the FTC has the right to say that it can regulate deception.
Well, you know, it's interesting because you and I had a conversation the other day about when you call a company that they say this call is going to be recorded. And some of the companies give you an option. And I think I told you this, and I say, no, I don't want it recorded. But most of them don't give you an option.
Right.
They're telling you that it's going to be recorded. And if you don't like it, I guess you can hang up.
Well, it's a tough luck contract. So much of internet policy, the privacy policies are basically take it or leave it, right? I mean, you can't call up Google and negotiate the terms of its privacy policy. Can't do that. Can't do it with Facebook, can't do it with Spotify, can't do it with any of them. You either decided that you're going to go in or not. And when it comes to biometrics, I'm suggesting that is a fundamental problem. And just because the ship hasn't sailed yet, maybe we can do something about it.
Interesting.
Joe, can I just say, can you give us a few positives that can come out of all of this?
Okay.
So we're not so scared.
No, they don't have to be scared. A few positives about it is that it gets people aware. Okay, that's one thing. I do think that, do you know that half of the country, I was helping Pew do a survey a couple of years ago. And as part of it, I said, do me a favor, ask people whether they say please to Alexa or Google Assistant. And in fact, we found that half of Americans who own these things say please and half don't. My point is, don't treat these things like they're our friends, okay? And if you teach your kids that they're not our friends, it's an it rather than a she, okay? That's one. The other thing is voice can be incredibly useful. The ability to speak to a machine, if you particularly have problems with your hands and mobility and stuff like that, is amazing. The idea that we can use voice to decide whether a person has a disease or not is incredible, okay? So I'm not saying we should get rid of the ability to use voice in positive ways. I'm just saying enough, marketers have enough ways to interrogate us. Let's stop here when it comes to that kind of profiling. That's all I'm saying. But I think that voice, natural language processing, the idea of using voice for positive social purposes, all of that should continue.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we've reached the hour mark. So I want to take the opportunity to thank you, Professor, for the talk and for answering questions. And I'd like to thank everyone who participated and attended tonight. Janet, I don't know, do you have any closing words before we head out?
Unmute myself, okay. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming and to thank
Thank you.
Turow for such an enlightening hour that you spent. We really appreciate it. And we just like people to look ahead to some other evening presentations that we're going to have. We're still arranging a November one, which we hope will be a cooking one. And in December, there'll be a lecture on Kabbalah. And January meditation, and on from there. So we're hoping to find all kinds of diverse speakers. We very much appreciate our keynote speakers' participation. And as always, we appreciate our community's involvement with the library. The library, you know, is now opened all of the hours that it always was. And the librarians are doing their best to offer services in a way that's safe and helpful. If any of you went to the Union Fire Company Ballackinwood Library event 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was incredible participation from the community, and it just brought to the fore how important the library is to families in Ballackinwood, in Marion, in Narberth, and the whole area. So we appreciate people's support in the past, and we would look forward, if you can, to your support for the library in the future. You can always donate to the Ballackinwood Library through our site as well as through our newsletter. Thank you.
And finally, for those who asked, these are recorded and I believe are made available through the library system. So we can, I think the librarians can advise how to access them. I don't know offhand, but thank you, everyone.
We'll post a link when it's available.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Great.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Good night.
much, Joe.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thanks.